Hey, everybody. Welcome to our presentation, Event Travel. Is it about intent or ability? My name is Frederick. I'm the head of sales at Stay22.
Hey, I'm Kevin, owner and product manager at Stay22.
So, why we chose this subject, why we chose this question, right? Aside from the fact that obviously we're an event travel solution, and this type of questions, obviously matter greatly for the future of our company, but also because travel has been an industry that's been extremely resilient to past crises, right? Whether it be political ones or other similar pandemics in the past. Nothing really had dented its double-digit growth. So for the first time in pretty much half a century, we're seeing a travel taking a gigantic dip in terms of its growth, right? We're actually contracting drastically in 2020. So asking ourselves the question, will the patrons still be willing to travel for events, is one that I think is worth asking. So if you're curious, if you don't know about us, what's Stay22, right? So very briefly, our mission is to help event-goers make the best and fastest travel decisions. As simple as that, and we do that via a map perspective, which I'll show very briefly after. So where we take our data, right? Where do we going to look at the empirical evidence to come up with some of our hypotheses and conclusions here is really taken from the event space. You see a lot of names here. This is a few amongst many of our various partners. And we had a special focus, obviously, in the ticketing world for the pertinence of this crowd here today. So I mentioned, map-based solution. You see it a bit here at work. So an interactive map that allows, the venue to be at the center of that map, and then in an interactive way for the user to discover all the travel options, mainly accommodations that he can book in relation to the location of his show, right? And the data comes from all the interactions on the map that the user does, whether it be a click, whether it be the device that he's on, or the choice of accommodation that he takes. So this is the type of data points that we will be looking in the next few minutes. So the first question we're asking ourselves, pretty self-evident. So has COVID reduced travel intent for events? We hear that it has a lot. We hear that the future will be very different from the past. But that makes sense. I mean, there's a very, I think it's a worthy question to ask ourselves, how it's going to change. But let's look at the actual data to see if there's any indication of that. So one thing's for sure is that there's less people traveling for events than ever before. You don't really need for us to point that truth. This is the evolution of the map loads in our ticketing segment specifically. And I'll let my colleague Kevin explain basically what that means for your perspective.
Yeah, just to clarify, essentially, so the map loads themselves are whenever the Stay22 map is being called or essentially loaded in one of our partners' platform. Our map are usually integrated either on an event page directly or a confirmation page for ticketing in that case. So what we're referring here when we say one map load equals one ticketing transaction is if a map is integrated on a confirmation page in that sense, this means there was a transaction for a ticket purchase, and then the map is being displayed to the user itself. So usually that's where the intent is the highest because the person already purchased his ticket for an event. And then at that point, that's where we'd start thinking about its accommodation, quite simply.
Yeah, great point. So essentially it's very simple, less map loads for us in the ticketing segment on confirmation pages because less tickets are being sold, because there's less events, and thus there's less, event travel. Pretty self-evident. So there's definitely less people traveling for events right now. But this is the interesting part, right? So we're trying to differentiate whether this issue is one of intent or ability. This is the evolution of our conversion rates. So essentially, this is all proportions being equal, all things being equal in terms of volume. How much people are still willing to travel for events or book accommodations using Stay22. So, I think there's a story here, Kevin, is that if we were in April, the answer would be yes. There's definitely a drop in intent of traveling for events. But we see the evolution of that graph, and that it has not only matched the pre-pandemic level, our conversion rates have matched the pre-pandemic levels, it also surpassed it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at February, for example, where we hit our first historical high at the time, right before essentially the drop of March. And then we can obviously understand that April was kind of the bottom of the barrel for us. But then we can already see that things picked up during the summer. And then in September, we actually hit a brand new historical high for the company, which was once again surpassed in October once more by 20% higher, actually. So as far as intent, there's definitely a strong intent on our part as the conversion rate is now hitting historical high at Stay22.
So, we asked ourselves the first question: has COVID reduced travel intent for events? So we saw that the volume is down, that's for sure, no surprise, but the conversion rates is actually high and higher than ever right now. So the answer is straight up no. As to right now, like there's little or no evidence that patrons will be less inclined to travel for events. That does not mean that in the future that will be the case, but there's absolutely no evidence or data to support that claim right now. So contrary to what we hear, yes, there might be I'm sure there will be some people who are fearful to return and travel for events, but that is negligible right now, to say the least. So the second question, the follow-up question is, okay, so it has not killed or dented the intent of a patron to travel, but has it changed the way they plan for travel? That's the question we'll try to address. So one thing we hear a lot is more drive than fly, which kind of means event travel or events in general will be more local than ever. It will pull a local crowd. So we looked at the numbers pre and post, different ranges, it's all in kilometers. And I'm not going to go every single line, but essentially you see that there are all slight differences, but nothing to tell a true story or nothing to indicate a clear change. So right now, essentially, we're not seeing a drastic change on that side at all. That concept does not seem to be echoed with data.
And if I can add to that, what we're not seeing right now, for example, is the short range, and also because there's a big trend right now about staycation. However, what I want to point out is this is not really the staycation concept or the short range concept doesn't apply that much to our users, being mainly event goers in that case. So everything that's below 100 kilometers doesn't fit as much the profile of most of our user base. Actually,
Yep.
That's why the short range is not there.
Good point. Another thing we could look at is, hey, has it changed the behavior in what type of accommodation do they book? So here there is a slight change. We see a little push towards, overall at least, a little push towards rentals, Airbnbs if you'd like. But that is still spread out very differently across different regions. You see different, Western Europe, France, for example, having a very different story than the UK. It's again very different than what we see in New Zealand. So a bit of a shift here towards rental, but again, all over the place, nothing for us to say it's an absolute clear trend.
Yeah, with especially with all the social distancing rules that are applied pretty much everywhere at this point. It's no surprise that remote locations are being favored, hence why rental is still remaining in a dominant position.
Yeah, like places like cottages, countryside, and etc. That's definitely a on the supply side, there's just so much more rentals and hotels. It's a great point, Kevin. Good point. Another one is the length of stay. So meaning how long does the traveling patron stays in town for the show? So we already had a difference previously that those who booked rentals clearly stayed longer than the ones who booked hotels. And now that trend has been, I want to say aggravated, but it's been more, they're staying longer than ever, essentially, in rentals. That's another pretty clear trend. We're looking at above 20% length of stay in terms of nights that the event goer is staying in rentals for. So that's a pretty interesting change as well.
Yep. And historically, it's no real secret that right now rentals is usually cheaper which or actually people can accommodate more people within one accommodation unit in rentals. So that's why people tend to book rentals for longer periods of time. But right now with COVID, well, people also tend to save a lot. I've had the opportunity to save up also a lot of money at the same time, or flat out just are too eager to actually travel and they want to stay an extra day or two or a whole week at that point, which is what is making that average go up that
Yeah,
much.
yeah. No, it could be. You're right in a sense that, you can have definitely, if you're a bigger group, rentals makes more sense. With the concept of bubbles being very popular, it could very well be that it's a family to say, hey, let's go to this event and let's travel as a family. And whoever means family, usually, I'm generalizing, from a budget point of view, the rentals is substantially more attractive than the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is just the device, right? So historically, we've always seen that mobile is for shopping, and the actual transaction, the booking, happens on desktop. Now that's still the case right now, as you can see with aggregate numbers. Definitely with more transactions happening on desktop. But what's interesting is that for the past 10 years, the market share of mobile has been growing steadily, year over year. And for the first time, and I was surprised at seeing this data, well, desktop took market share from mobile. I think my interpretation is one that it's very simply that people have been confined and are in front of their desktops or laptops substantially more. And my hypothesis seems to be um, shown true by which region saw the biggest increase in desktop market share, which is a lot in Western Europe, where they had the harshest lockdowns as well. Places like France, for example. Now, so we're asking ourselves, has COVID changed how the patron plans his travel? So if the previous question we asked ourselves was a clear no, we had no data on it. Here, there are certain differences, right? We saw more rentals than hotels. We saw, the length of stay going slightly up, especially driven by rentals. And we saw more desktop versus mobile than pandemic. But, so yes, there is a slight difference in the way the event goer actually, plans his travel. But this is really small, and the data sample or turbulence of this reality, with this combined with the only slight difference in data, for us means that okay, there could be an evolution at play, but a slight one, and certainly not a revolution like we're often led to believe. Meaning that, both on the, hey, are patrons still willing to travel for events, and has the way they travel for events drastically changed? The answer seems to be, well, no in both cases. And that the post-COVID reality of event travel will not be drastically different from the pre-COVID event travel reality. Or at least there's no data to support that claim. So, this was really looking at right now what's happening, the data. Let's try our hand at the future, right? And crystal ball for what it's worth. One hypothesis that we have, and I know we kind of said it, but I think it's worth putting, our hand in fire for this, if you'd like, is that, when restrictions subside and events at scale, at least, are deemed safe by government, we think that patrons will return for events in the same proportion as pre-pandemic. Yes, we're biased. That's our business. But that being said, the conversion rates are not biased and the numbers are not biased. The fact that we have conversion rates ever, higher than ever is something that we cannot discard completely. Now, what's missing is really volume. So for us, the conclusion is that it's not a problem of ability. Apologies, the other way around. It is a problem of ability, not intent. The other one is kind of pushing the first hypotheses, but further, right? We actually believe that there's going to be a temporary boom of event travel once all the restrictions are lifted, meaning that we will see a substantial amount of, actually substantially more event travel than pre-pandemic levels. So not just returning back to normal, more than normal. The reason for this is that, Like we mentioned before, we think it's an issue of ability, meaning that there's demand that cannot find supply. So that demand is staying on the sidelines and being pent up. So when the floodgates open, we expect a temporary, keyword temporary, big boom of event travel.
And if I can add to that, along with all the hotels already providing historical low prices most of the time on their rooms and discounts as well, I wouldn't be surprised also if government and other institutional entities move forward with various form of incentives to bring more travelers into their city, country, or state, and try to keep them for longer. We've already seen, for example, stuff like transportation, free passes, and things like that. But that's definitely something I would not be surprised, because right now, once everything, as you said, the floodgates open, everyone will try to grab their own share of travelers that's going to come out through the gates.
Yeah, yeah, good. There's a good point. I think the supply will be as attractive as ever to capture that pent up demand, and it's going to be a nice little marriage of supply and demand. At the very least, we hope and we predict. The last one, a bit of more of a long-term prediction, is that we saw a trend of leisure travel and event travel kind of blur and become one, right? And that seems to equal for longer stays, and then the patrons staying in town longer than before, right? And when you think event travel, obviously you have your leisure show, your sports show, but it's also business travel, right? For business events. So we saw the trend of rentals over hotels continuing, right? The market share of rentals growing. That equals usually for longer stays by default. And we're seeing that the actual rentals lengths of stays is also increasing on top of that. So I think the opportunity that we want to say here is that I think it's not going to be something that's rare to see a patron staying in town for 6-7 nights for, even though the reason what drove his travel is maybe a one-night live music show. And that's an opportunity to sell him on various other activities and events within his 6 or 7 nights stay. So that's our 3 kind of crystal ball predictions. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Stay22, we're all about sharing data, sharing ideas, and debating if you guys disagree. So if you have questions, you have comments, you disagree, you think our stuff is all future babble, let us know. We're more than happy to discuss this. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, guys.